They woke him at the sound of water. Not water poured into a cup nor a bath drawn in the women's chambers above, but a slow, unhurried drip that had lodged itself in his sleep like a single word repeated and turned the world into a damp, echoing sentence. He lay in the black cell and listened to it. Every third drop seemed louder than the one before, as if the stone had found a place to place its grief more exactly, and Tyrion counted until he forgot the number and began again. Counting soothed him. Numbers had a courtesy to them that men lacked. His breaths made the air stir, and all at once he noticed the different scents layered across the leavings of the night. The walls were a cold chalk smell. The straw he lay upon held a ghost of old harvests. The iron door was sharp like wet blood. He put his hand to his chest and felt the thud of his heart, steady and small. He was unafraid of many things. He was afraid now, but the fear sat in him like a stone sits where a mason has placed it, deliberate and not without purpose. Footsteps came down the corridor, the slap of leather on stone. He did not move. He had been awake for hours, but he did not move until the footsteps stopped outside his door and the iron slid back with the reluctance of a heavy thing. A bar had to be lifted. A bar was lifted. The bolt scratched in its housing. He pictured the guards' hands, calloused and chapped, red with the damp and bruised by their armor. He pictured them because it was something to do. "Lannister," a voice said, carrying the sourness of a man who rose too early for his liking. "Up." He sat, careful and slow, and the straw complained beneath him. When he stood, his left knee gave the small protest it always did, and he took a breath to keep his balance. His bare feet met the floor and he felt the shock of it travel up his bones. The guard held a lantern that threw a blade of light across the cell, and in it Tyrion saw his own toes, pale and dirty, the toenails like little shells. He had dreamed of warm socks the night before, gray wool, a gift from a woman he had loved once and was certain he had never known. He smiled. He suspected that meant he was going to die. The guard's mouth moved. He had thick lips and, when he spoke, spit gathered in the corners and clung because it had lost the habit of falling. "Today," the guard said, as if Tyrion might have misunderstood what all the days had been leading toward. "The trial." Tyrion inclined his head. He put on the rough linen he had been given, the coarse weave catching at the hair on his chest. He took the cup of water when it was handed to him, drank and said, "It's cold." The guard blinked, as if shattered for a moment from the dreary armor of his mourning by the oddness of the remark. "It's from the cistern," he said. "Then thank the cistern for me," Tyrion said and handed the cup back. They did not chain him. Someone had decided that the appearance of restraint made him more dangerous than his liberty did. Instead they gave him 2 guards, no 3. As his eyes adjusted to the dark, he saw the last one against the wall, a shadow that detached itself. They moved him along the corridor, past doors just like his and a 4th that was heavier, and up a stair that seemed to have no end. He counted those steps as well and lost count at 64. The keep smelled different above. The palace slept in a perfume of old paper and oiled wood and fat burned in lamps. The guards' boots clacked on a different kind of stone here, older and quarried with more confidence. He wondered if any of the masons who had set these slabs into place had stepped back, proud, and said to his fellows that this stair would one day carry a king. None had probably said it would carry a dwarf to his trial. When they paused at a landing, Tyrion looked through a narrow slit in the wall at the city below. The morning lay on King's Landing like a hand on a fevered child. Mists came off the Blackwater and the first light broke in the east like yellow wine poured too quickly. He could smell fish already, the river people coming in with their night's haul, and underneath it grain, and underneath that, faint as a remembered insult, smoke from the fires of those who still lived in the charred districts and rebuilt one timber at a time because there was no other choice. He closed his eyes and the river smell became something else, became the smell of a woman's hair after rain, became the smell of his own fear made clean. "This way," the guard said, and he followed. He had dressed himself with care. What else could he do? He had chosen a tunic that fit, and a belt that was too long because all belts were too long, and had tied its ends so that it did not slap his knee when he walked. They had given him back his boots, for which he was grateful. He was always shorter without boots. The right heel clicked a fraction before the rest of the sole met the stone. He noticed the sound and filed it away and found himself for a ridiculous moment imagining that a clever assassin in a nearby corridor was counting those clicks and learning the rhythm of his walk. They brought him through a narrow passage where the walls were damp, then through a larger one where tapestries kept out the cold and the loudness of soldiers' laughter. He did not look at the pictures. He knew most of them by heart. Stories stitched by careful, aching fingers, kings who had cut throats to become saints in thread. They led him into the light finally, into the inner yard where the sun had found the sand and turned it the color of old gold. It would happen here. The stands had been erected at dawn, rows upon rows of benches for the high and the low of the court. The benches closest to the raised platform where the judges sat were for silk and velvet. Beyond that, rough cloth and fur. Beyond that, wood, and beyond wood, dirt. He had stood in that dirt before, much younger, watching a tourney he had not been wanted at. Tea and learning that there was a music to the sound of men breaking each other that only the noble heard. He saw the red silk canopy first, and under it the 3 chairs. He knew the chairs. His father's in the center, the old iron rings of it polished by a century of elbows and sweat. To the left a chair carved with roses for the Tyrell. To the right a chair with 8 small suns shaved into the dark wood for the Dornishman. He saw Mace Tyrell at once. His clothes like a garden had been made into a man. He saw Lord Oberyn Martell, his grace contained, his mouth calm, the half-smile that seemed to say he'd be pleased with a decent vintage or a good killing, whichever came first. And of course he saw his father. Tywin Lannister's face was a false summer. It appeared warm from a distance. Up close it was a light so bright it burned. His father's hands rested on the arms of the chair as if they belonged to the chair and the chair to him. Nothing else moved. Tyrion's gaze flicked aside to the woman standing behind Tywin's shoulder, the queen whose body was an accusation. Cersei wore black that threw her hair into brighter gold. Her eyes were 2 blades and the smaller blade cut deeper. Jaime stood a little apart and a little behind, his posture loose, the muscles of his jaw not, his one hand, curled against his thigh as if attached by tensed wire. The glances between them were a language Tyrion had learned when young and never mastered. The guards led him to a place marked by a small post with a scrap of crimson tied to it. He supposed that meant Lannister. The wind lifted the scrap and laid it down again. When he reached his place, a page in feathered cap held out a cup on a tray and Tyrion took it, because it would have been rude not to and also because there was wine in it, red and old enough that the first taste was a memory and the second taste a reconciliation. "You are accused," Tywin said, when the herald had shouted and the crows had stopped carrying on and the people had become what they always became, a pond that thought it was a sea. "I am," Tyrion said, as if it were a small matter, someone else's hat he was suspected of having stolen. "You may choose trial by combat," Tywin continued, though everybody knew he already had. "Champion against champion. Victory is innocence. Defeat is confession." His voice was a knife laid on a whetstone. "So it has always been." Tyrion looked at his father. He was a small man in a large place. He had been a small man in every place. But he had never been a small wit, and his nose had grown large enough for 2 men combined. When he smiled, it was because the alternative was to cry and the day was too costly to waste tears on. "So it has always been," he echoed, and let the words see that he might mean them and might not. They brought forward the Dornishman in his armor like a story told about snakes. Broken sunlight slid along his shoulders. It found the long, lean lines of him and left them untouched. He wore a smile that had no temperature. The spear he carried was taller than 2 Tyrions end to end. The steel of its head burnished to a low song. A strip of red cloth was tied just below the socket. It hung in the light wind and described a lazy S each time it swung. Oberyn Martell stood in the sand and did not bow to the judges, did not bow to anyone. He turned to Tyrion and his eyes were black, not in color but in certainty, a darkness without any hollow in it. He came forward and said very quietly, "You will be free today." "Everyone says that," Tyrion replied. "It begins to sound like a curse." Oberyn's smile reached a corner of his mouth and decided to pitch the smallest of tents there. "The man you asked to kill is dead already," he said, "and does not know it. Sometimes it takes a little time for news to travel within a body." "You have a poet's way of making promises," Tyrion said. "If you are killed, I expect you to haunt me." "I will haunt the one who did this to my sister," Oberyn said without heat. He turned and walked toward the center of the yard, and the red strip on his spear seemed to dip in a small bow to the sand. The other door opened and the mountain came in with other men around him, not to protect him but to signify his bigness by their smallness. How did a man that large fit under a sky meant for other men? Tyrion had the childish thought that the heavens would have to move aside to make room. The armor was plain, functional, battered in the way that tells its own stories. The visor was down and secretive. The mountain did not look at anyone. He did not need to. The ring of the chain between his legs chattered when he walked, and the sound went out over the crowd and made 100 throats go quieter. A septon muttered something with a spout of his lips. Men as old as stone crossed themselves. Not for the gods' protection, Tyrion thought, but to show each other they remembered who was watching. The herald spilled words in the hot air, and they lay for a heartbeat and then shriveled. Tyrion felt sweat on his back. A fly, important and personal, went past his ear and he brushed it away with the back of his hand. And then, because he was who he was, he smiled at the fly's persistence and thought of men he had known who had been less determined. "Begin," Tywin said. The sand took to the men like an old friend. Oberyn did not stand but swayed. He did not sway but stepped. He did not step but was in another place. The spear made a shape in the air as if he were drawing a letter very precise and very secret. The mountain shifted his enormous weight and the plates of his armor slid against each other with the weary sound of millstones grinding. No one moved closer to the railing. No one cheered. A hawk went by high above and only Tyrion looked up to see it. Oberyn's first feint was a question asked of the sand. The point dipped and flicked little grains a foot toward Gregor's greaves. The mountain took a half-step that no one but a few noticed and twisted his hips and made a small instant of exposed flesh between the bottom of his breastplate and the top of his cuisses visible like a brief sunrise through cloud. Oberyn did not strike at it. He smiled, a clever child seeing a trick repeated with intent. He moved left, right, and set his feet in a way that made an adventure of the distance between them. The red strip floated. Tyrion did not breathe for the time it took to count to 6. The first touch was not a touch but a sound, the spearhead knocking against steel along the mountain's shoulder to make a bright, contemptuous ring. Oberyn skipped back as the great sword came down, straight and heavy as a barber's pole. Sand leapt up in the wake of the blade and resignedly flopped back down. The spear came again, this time to the thigh, ringing off, then to the visor, a spark skittering, pretty as a mischief. The mountain moved forward, always forward, and the air ahead of him changed into a place where men could not live long. "How many sisters has this city?" Tyrion murmured to no one, and Jaime, who was closer than he had thought, said under his breath, "One more than it deserves. 3 passes, then 5. Oberyn spoke, but the words were not the show he had promised. They were short, each one placed carefully on the sand between them. He was laying a path. Gregor did not speak. He made the sound a millstone makes and a distant smith's hammer. The spear found flesh. It happened in an instant and happened slowly. The red strip went one way and the point went the other, down and in, the target the thigh in the gap that had flashed a minute before. Oberyn had waited and now the waiting paid. The steel bit and blood came, not a banner, just a respectable welling. The mountain's leg changed its mind about how much weight it could hold and the giant went down on one knee. The sound was like a tree deciding it had been standing long enough. The crowd breathed out. There is a noise thousands of people make when they remember to be alive. Oberyn did not crow. He did not leap onto the dying, not then. He danced around the reach of the sword when it came up in a huge, unbelieving slash, and tapped the helm with the butt of his spear as daintily as a man tapping a door to wake a lover. He set his feet again and the spear went for the armpit next, a natural next step in the sequence of human weaknesses. The point slid along metal, and the angle was poor, and Tyrion wondered if any of the men in the yard saw what he had seen. The tiny slide of Oberyn's left foot on a patch of underlying stone that had been heated and dried and smoothed by the practice of 100 others. That slide put the thrust 2 inches high. It still did enough. The armor rang, and Gregor reached for the spear as a man reaches for a knife that has fallen off his table. He missed. Oberyn's face did not change. "Do you hear me?" he asked, low and plain, and the mountain's visor moved half an inch as if the man inside were trying to find the origin of the sound. Tyrion's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. A bee was trapped behind his ribs. The sun warmed the top of his head, and he wished very much for a hat and a late breakfast and a woman who had not testified. The woman who had testified rose in him like an ache, and he swallowed hard. Another pass, then another. The spear took the other leg. There is a moment in a fight when both men know the end has declared itself and is merely waiting to walk across the sand. Tyrion saw it sit down between them. The mountain pressed up with a sound like a smith's bellows and got to his feet, and it impressed Tyrion that a thing that wounded could be that tall still. He thought of the walls of Casterly Rock and the steps that went down into the heart of it. He thought of how you could be small and safe there, or large and in danger everywhere. "Say it," Oberyn said as the point circled and ticked and forced the larger man to show more steel than he wanted. "Say what you have done." The sword came overhand, again. Oberyn let it pass as a man lets a remark pass when he is too amused to be offended. He darted inside, where no one should want to be, and the spear shaft checked the sword, and the butt came under and then up into the hollow of the visor with a hard, wooden punch. Metal dented inward with a soft complaint. Gregor staggered. Oberyn withdrew, and the point went in again, the angle right this time under the arm. Tyrion heard the sound men make when they realize something important has been done correctly. "Say it," Oberyn said again, not loud, not large, but the only voice that mattered. Tyrion thought of a girl, a long time ago, crying while men laughed. He thought of his brother's mouth when it said, "I did as father told me," and the world fell differently on that day. He thought of a wicked boy with cruel eyes choking on purple and his own hands doing nothing to save him. He thought of how little the world cares if a man speaks the truth. He realized he was praying without any gods listening. Gregor swung again and again, and every stroke built a tent for the next and a grave in the sand with its fall. The spear was everywhere it needed to be. Oberyn did not smile now. He was working. His face changed not at all. He forced the giant to turn his torso, made him clumsy by simply requiring that he be as large as he was. The patient cut of the spear took the tendons in one leg, then the other. More blood. At last Gregor was on his knees again, and this time the sand caught him gladly. Oberyn stepped close, and the world held its breath for him. The spear point kissed the edge of the visor, finding purchase in the steel crumple he had made there earlier. He set his weight behind it. He leaned. His arms were straight, and the long muscles in them appeared under the skin like quiet snakes. Tyrion could see his hands on the shaft, dark with callus, perfect as tools that had been us. And to make finer tools. Gregor raised his gauntlet hands to push the shaft away, and Oberyn stepped one foot to the side to change the angle and the leverage. It was a small movement, and it turned the spear from a line into a sentence. The point slid through metal with the most disgusting grace Tyrion had ever witnessed and into the darkness behind. The spearhead was in a man's head. Oberyn pressed. There was a wet, domestic sound, like a melon broken too late in the season. Everything that was Gregor became suddenly too heavy for the world to hold upright, and he tipped and fell backward. The spear held, and for a brief instant Oberyn seemed to be pulling down the statue of a god with a common pole, something a farmer would use to lift a pail out of a well. Then the shaft sprang free, the red cloth danced once, and Gregor Clegane hit the ground. The sound ran along the stone walls and returned as a rumor. The mountain is fallen. Silence is never truly silent. Men shifted. A woman sobbed once and put her hands to her mouth to catch it. The flies returned to their business. The hawk above had found something better to consider and was gone. Tyrion stared at the shape on the sand, enormous and terribly still. He realized that when you kill a very big man, What you have in front of you is not a very big man anymore, not a giant, but a problem of lifting. Oberyn held the spear in both hands like a matter settled between friends. He stood a long time. The wrong kind of triumph would have been an insult to the dead. The right kind would have been an insult to the living. He chose neither. He turned and faced the platform. "I claim justice," he said, and his voice was not raised, and yet it reached and touched every ear. "By the laws of the realm and the law of the gods you claim to serve. Justice for the man I fought for, who stands in bonds of accusation. Justice for my blood." He did not look at Tywin when he said blood, but the word traveled and set itself at Tywin Lannister's feet like a terribly polite dog. Tywin's face was stone-warming. He lifted his hand the smallest of distances, and Mace Tyrell decided this was a censer he could roll forward on his own, and he boomed, "By victory, innocence. By fall, guilt. So the gods have decreed." Tywin did not move. Only when the man with roses shut his mouth did he speak. "Tyrion Lannister," he said, each syllable perfect as a coin. "You are acquitted of the murder of Joffrey of House Baratheon. You are free to go. Two simple truths together can make an ocean." Tyrion's knees wished to become water. He held them at their work. He did not bow. He did not lift his eyes to heaven. He simply stood, and the world went on. The guards beside him blinked as if something had been taken from their faces. Cersei did not move at all, unless you counted the small rage that ran along her jawline, a rabbit in a hedge. Jaime closed his eyes in relief so brief that only a man who knew his brother better than sense would have caught it. The Septon made a noise about gods. The herald made a noise about justice. Men began to recall they had hands and that hands could clap. They clapped, some of them. Others muttered. Tyrion lifted his cup and found it still had a mouthful in it, and he drank it all and handed the empty back to the page, who looked at him as he had once looked at old stories and found them less than the hot soup on the table. Oberyn approached him. Up close, Tyrion could smell the metal and the sweat on him, and underneath it something like oranges. The Dornishman's eyes were very dark indeed and contained no surprise whatsoever. "You are free," he said. "So they say," Tyrion replied. "I was this morning, too, if it comes to that. It seems to be a thing that can be given or taken on a word." "Take yours, then," Oberyn said, "before someone thinks of a better word." Tyrion waited in the courtyard until the crowd had begun to find other business. He looked once at the body and then looked away, not because he could not bear it. He had borne worse, but because it felt like prying into a family he did not belong to. He looked up at the sky instead, and found the sun had climbed a finger-width higher, and that the day had decided to continue after all. A small, absurd sound of laughter rose in him, and he choked on it, and it became a cough. When he had composed himself, Jaime was at his elbow. "Come," his brother said. The word had the gentleness of a hand placed on an animal's neck to say you mean no harm. They went into the shade of an arcade where the breezes were kind to them. A page had anticipated and placed 2 cups of watered wine on a tray there because pages learned to anticipate what men of rank might ask for, and sometimes they were right. Jaime took one. Tyrion took the other. They drank. The stone wall at his back was damp and real. "You should not be here," Tyrion said for form's sake. "If I were where I should be," Jaime said dryly, "I would be in 3 different places all at once, and none of them would have wine." Tyrion considered him. His brother's face was older than it had been yesterday. Perhaps he imagined that. Perhaps every man's face was older than it had been yesterday. He found that his hand was shaking, set the cup down, and pretended he had intended to stop. "You believed me," he said. "I know you are many things," Jaime replied, looking past him into the yard where men were lifting a monstrous weight with ropes and a winch. "But I have never known you to be that. A king killer?" Tyrion suggested, a tipsy kindness in the cruelty. "A fool who whispers poison to a child," Jaime said. His mouth twisted at the word child. "No." Tyrion nodded. "You should be careful," he said then, and surprised himself, because he did not know who he meant to warn Jaime about. Tywin, Cersei, himself. He was careful about most things when sober, which he rarely was, and when frightened, which he often was, his care turned to a different craft, a kind of play acting that had saved him long enough to get him killed eventually. Jaime's gaze returned to him. For an instant there was a look there, something Tyrion had seen once or twice when they were boys standing on a ledge and looking down at the sea, something like a dare and a plea not to be dared. It went as quickly as it came. "Father will send for you," Jaime said. "Perhaps not today." "Why not today?" Tyrion asked. He could taste the answer like blood in his mouth. "Today he has to reckon with a dead giant," Jaime said. "And with Dorne." "Dorne," Tyrion repeated, as if it were a word that required tasting. "Yes. Stay to the light places," Jaime said, which might have been a joke if the palace held any light places, and turned to go. He paused then, against his will. Tyrion saw the pause rather than the man. "Be careful of her," he said very low. "Which?" Tyrion asked. He was permitted one cruelty a day, and it would likely be spent on the woman who had called herself sweet and had taken gold in exchange for her sweetness. Jaime did not answer. He went away with the measured stride of a man who had learned how to make one hand look like the right number of hands. Tyrion remained in the shade a few minutes longer. He let the wind dry the sweat under his collar. He waited until the worst of the shaking had left his fingers, and then he went in search of a bath and a shirt that did not hold the smell of a cell. He did not hurry. There would be guards if he hurried. He moved softly through the corridors and listened to the palace attend to itself. Pages hurrying, a door murmuring as it closed, the low thunder of a man laughing where he should have been silent. He knew these sounds. He had made some of them himself. When he reached the chambers that had been his once and had been stripped of his comforts, and then, on the sudden turn of a word in a court, might be his again, he found them very clean. It was the kind of clean that meant someone expected him. Fresh water in the tub, clean linens folded, a loaf of dark bread, a pot of butter, and a small dish of white honey. Tyrion looked at the honey a long time as if it were a jewel, and then, with a laugh he could not swallow this time, he stuck a finger in it and sucked the sweetness away, and it was almost enough to make him forgive someone for something. He took the bath that had been drawn. The water was warm, and he sank into it until his head floated and the crown of his skull knocked softly against the wood. He felt each muscle remember that it existed for reasons beyond bracing against blows. He reflected that he had been acquitted, that his life had been returned to him like a fragile thing wrapped in cloth, palms outstretched. He thought of how little anybody around him would respect it in his hands. When he was dry, he put on a shirt he had not worn in months. It smelled of soap and a hint of cedar. He ate bread and butter, then bread and honey, then just honey, then forced himself to stop before he became his sins. He sat in the chair by the window that was too high for him and drank watered wine and considered the view, which had not changed while he had been below and would not change while he lived or died. The city lay under the late morning like a dog too hot to move. The rookeries were alive with birds carrying other people's sentences. The river was a lazy snake. He loved it and loathed it with the same mouth. Someone knocked. He knew at once it was not a guard. Guards are trained to knock like drums. This knock was crisp and anticipatory. "Come," he said, and was unsurprised when Varys slipped in. A smile like a curtain drawn easily across a complicated window. "My lord," the eunuch said, as if the compliment had never left him, as if it had always lived in his mouth waiting for Tyrion to come back and claim it. He glided into the room and took in the details without appearing to look at them. The empty dish of honey, the faint dampness around the tub, the shirt. "I see Justice has a sweet tooth." "Justice has many appetites," Tyrion said. "Sometimes it recognizes one of them." Varys folded his hands, and when he did it looked like a modest chapel on a hill. "I bring congratulations," he said. "One should never underestimate the comfort of hearing favorable news twice." "What else do you bring?" Tyrion asked. "You always bring something else." "A warning, perhaps," Varys said. "A whisper of danger. Think of it as a spice to improve the stew." He cleared his throat gently. "The Prince of Dorne has made a point of killing a very large man who was very dear to certain interests without becoming messy about it. There are those who will think him more dangerous than he is. There are those who will think him less dangerous than he is. Neither are correct, and both are unwise. Also, Varys lifted a finger, the gesture delicate as a lace hook. Her grace has a long memory. I never doubted as much, Tyrion said. He sipped his wine. She will find another way to drown me. One cannot spend a life in a river and not have learned something of swimming. See that you remember to float as well, Varys said. Fighting the current is exhausting. He tilted his head. Word comes from the Vale. Does it? Will it be good? It will be like all words from the Vale, Varys said. Fresh air, steep paths, strangled mysteries. The girl is lost to us for now. Sansa, Tyrion said, tasting the name that had once been a hope and then a chain. How convenient for the queen. Less convenient for you, Varys said softly. Tyrion set down the cup. I have been acquitted, he said. Perhaps I should go for a walk. Varys smiled as if he had been offered a small plum. The gardens are pleasant, he said. The weather agrees with shame. He left as he had come, with the flit of a smooth fish. Tyrion sat a moment longer, looking at his hands, which seemed older than they should be and more stubborn. He considered what a free man might do with an hour that did not yet belong to someone else. He thought of Shay and how his entire body wanted to become a curse when he said her name, and how the curse would be most directed at himself. He thought of Oberyn Martell and of the way the spear had become a sentence. He thought of his father and the way that every room that held the man had to look at him. He rose because sitting had never rescued anyone. The palace gardens were less flowers than the rumor of flowers. The heat kept them sober, but the coins of sunlight on the leaves were many and good, and in the shadows the smell of damp earth tried its small best to make the place a wood. Tyrion kept to the gravel paths that had been laid to guide men through nobles' illusions, and all the while he heard the buzzing of lesser creatures trading in other business. A girl in green leaned on a balustrade and giggled at a joke a boy had not meant to make. A lady with a face like a lamp wick guided her lapdog with a leash that cost more than the dog. A knight in a half-ruined surcoat tried to walk gracefully and remembered his youth halfway through and almost ran. Tyrion felt generous toward them all in the way of men who have been given back their lives in the morning and have not yet spent them on a bad word. He found Oberyn Martell by a pool that held a few brave lilies. The Dornishman was seated, the spear beside him, its point wrapped in oiled cloth and held casually against a stone, as if it were an old friend who had been asked to lean and do nothing for a while. He looked up when Tyrion approached and did not appear surprised because he had chosen in advance not to be surprised by anything that day. "My prince," Tyrion said. He did not bow. Oberyn was not fond of bows unless they were part of something interesting. "Sit," Oberyn said. He motioned to the low stone bench, and Tyrion climbed onto it and took his breath and settled. The prince watched a bee negotiate its small treaty with a lily. "They will say this was a provocation," he said at last. "They will say I killed a man on a day when a man should not have been killed. They will speak of peace with the north and with the Riverlands and with me and forget that my peace is not theirs to barter." "You killed a murderer," Tyrion said. "I killed an obedient man," Oberyn countered mildly. "A butcher, both truths. The second is the more useful. Ask your father." Tyrion rubbed a thumb along the seam of his trousers, a tactile confession to a nervous habit he had not worn down even now. "You think he ordered." "I think," Oberyn said, and there was a heatless precision in his voice that made the bee hesitate, "that men like your father know which tools to pick up and which to leave on the shelf when a task requires cleanliness. And if tools crack or dull or are broken, they are replaced. Neatly, quietly. I think that for years I have tasted copper and slept badly, and now the taste has changed and I will sleep better, and perhaps that is not justice in the eyes of gods. But it will be in the eyes of my daughters." "You have their love," Tyrion said. "I have their expectation," Oberyn corrected him. "They are different things. So, you are free. What will you do?" "Eat," Tyrion said with a shrug. "Drink. Hide. Count things. You?" Oberyn's dark eyes warmed at the corners. "I will drink," he said. "I will talk. I will ask for a name." "Whose?" Tyrion asked, though he knew. Oberyn turned his head to look fully at him, and in that turn there was a small danger, as if a deadly man had thought, how nice it might be to kill this one, and then decided no, the wine would not go with it. Your father has a list in his head, he said. The names of those whose sins he has filed under necessity. I will ask him to show it to me. And if he does not, Tyrion said. He will not, Oberyn agreed cheerfully. That is not the point. He reached out and trailed his fingers in the water and then rubbed them together, lifting them to his nose, as if even the palace pool held a bouquet to be considered. The point is that men who put their sins on shelves treat their sins like objects. Sometimes you walk into such a man's house and he does not notice a small theft. Sometimes you go and you take what you can carry and you leave. Sometimes what you take is only a memory. Sometimes it is a thing that bleeds. He rose in one movement, graceful as a boy who had learned there were men in the world slower than he was. Walk with me. They moved along the path together, a slender danger and a squat one. The garden's shapes made a play of them. Tyrion listened to the gravel's polite objections underfoot. Do you mean to leave soon? He asked. Not while there is wine, Oberyn said, which might have meant a day or a year in the way of princes. Alleria will grow bored. She will want a city that takes off its clothes more easily. Perhaps we will go then. Go to Dorne, Tyrion said, and the word was both a direction and the name of a story men told to each other when they wanted to argue about justice and heat. Come with us? Oberyn said suddenly. He did not stop walking. He said it in the tone a man uses when offering a slice of orange he has already cut. Tyrion laughed. Truly, I would be killed on the road, he said. If not by men, then by other people. And if not, Oberyn said. In Dorne, men do not kill a brother for what he is when they have better reasons. In Dorne, we drink late and we wake in the afternoon and the wind off the sea knows our names. In Dorne, gods are an excuse for feasting. Come, you would like it. Tyrion was tempted by the word like and had always been. I might, he admitted, but I have enemies here who would miss me. They would not miss, Oberyn said. His smile was white and brief and kind. Still, a thought. They came upon Alleria Sand where the path widened near a fig tree. She wore a dress as if it were her skin. Her eyes had the gravitas of a priestess and the humor of a thief. She looked at Tyrion and, without bowing, inclined her head the exact measure that courtesy demanded when courtesy was used as a napkin. My lord, she said, you are short and lucky today. I am always short, Tyrion said. She smiled. Only sometimes lucky. You should keep this man near you if you find a way to do so. I cannot keep him the way you do, Tyrion said. No, she agreed, wicked and proud at once. But there are other ways. Oberyn kissed her swiftly, like a man drinking from a cup he knew would be his again. And they moved on, leaving Tyrion with the sight of their hands as they brushed and entangled. He watched them go and felt the ache of what he had not had and had thought he had. He found a bench under an olive that had been coaxed into being decorative and sat and closed his eyes and listened to bees and men and thought of Shay. He went to find her when the sun had begun to decline and the palace had entered the half-tired hour when men whisper and doors are opened with less formality. He told himself he went to send her away. He told himself many things that sounded like words. He found her in a room that had been meant for some lesser lady in waiting, built with good ambition and poor light. There was a cloth on the table and a pitcher with condensation sweating down it and 2 cups. She had arranged flowers badly. She was pretty. He hated her for it. Tyrion, she said, and her mouth made shapes he remembered around other words. Please don't, he said. She blinked. Anger came to her like blush comes to other women, rising and innocent. I was scared, she said. What choice did I? You had many, Tyrion said. You chose the one that paid. And he stood in the door so that when he looked at her he had to turn his head, and the posture stopped him from running at her to grab her wrists and shake the truth out of them. I will give you all the money you require to be done with me. You should take it. You should go. You should hope I never see your face again, because I do not trust myself. I like to be a better man than I am. I like it very much, but I am not today." She stared at him, her lips parted, a girl's bewilderment wearing a woman's paint. He thought, there will be another man who will die of those lips. He thought, I am done with dying like that. "I loved you," she said, but the word loved had a price stamped on it, and he wanted to tear the coin out of her mouth. "You loved my purse," he said. "You loved that I was your story to tell to another man when you wanted him to think you clever. You will find someone else to tell it to." He fumbled at his belt and found the small purse he had carried for years, because old habits survive even dungeons, and he put it on the table. The weight made the wood respect it. "Take it and go." "Tyrion," she said, and his name in her mouth was so wrong and so beautiful that he had to shut his eyes. "Go," he said. "If you stay, I will say other things, and you will make me say other things, and I might forget who I am trying to be today." He left before she could refuse and make him who he had always been. He went where men go when they wish to be found only by those who know how to find them. He went to a small balcony that looked onto a smaller courtyard where laundry had been hung and nothing else happened. He stood with his hands on the stone. He did not cry. He would not give himself the pleasure. He heard footsteps then and smiled without meaning to. "I thought I had sent you away," he said, not turning. "I am like a bad debt," said the voice by the door. "I return when unlooked for." "Bronn," Tyrion said, and he turned and saw the ugly, comfortable face looking out from under a thatch of black hair, the eyes like honest thieves. The Sellsword wore a doublet that had once been fashionable and was now merely capable of hiding the places where it had been cut. He had a new belt and an old knife and a smile that had cost other men blood. He spread his hands. "You didn't fight for me." "I didn't," Bronn agreed. "I thought about it. Then I thought about not doing it. There was a lady with a castle. I like ladies. I like castles. I hoped you'd forgive me." "If I had died," Tyrion said, "I would have died shortly after praying that you rot." "And now?" Bronn asked, grinning. "Now," Tyrion said, "I might make a smaller prayer." Bronn leaned against the wall where it had been smoothed by other backs. "You're free," he said, and the word sounded small in his mouth. He did not like abstractions. He liked what he could put in a purse. "So they tell me," Tyrion said. "It will be interesting to see how long the feeling lasts." "You'll need men," Bronn said. "Doi?" Tyrion asked. "Perhaps I will become a monk." Bronn barked once. "You look poor in brown." "I look poor in every color," Tyrion said, and felt the laughter this time with no bitterness in it. "Stay near me," he added, after they had stood together like very unlikely statues for a time. "If nothing else, your face will remind me to keep mine." Bronn shrugged. "I'll stay so long as your company is worth more than another's. I've never lied to you about that." "It is why I've kept you," Tyrion said. He produced another purse from somewhere about his person. He had always liked hiding things where men would not think to look on him because they did not think to look at him. "Take this now. Consider it an advance on whatever you will charge me for saving my life the next time." He leaned on the stone. "I suppose I should go to see my father." "Now?" Bronn asked. "Why run while the water is calm?" "Because while it is calm, I may be able to see through it," Tyrion said, and left Bronn to the slow shrug that was both agreement and scorn. The Tower of the Hand greeted him with its taste for old brass and new fear. The servants there know the measure of their master's silences, and Tyrion, passing them, felt the way their spines attempted to be straight without being noticed. He could have laughed and didn't. He crossed the great outer room where men had once come to deliver petitions and now came to deliver themselves, and went through the inner door without being announced, because an announcement would have been a cruelty, and he was trying to hold off cruelties until he had an audience that deserved them. Tywin Lannister sat at his desk because Tywin Lannister was never anywhere else in the minds of those who feared him. He did not stand when Tyrion came in. He lifted his eyes. That was the scope of his greeting. "You have been acquitted," he said. "My congratulations." "You speak as if it were an inconvenience," Tyrion said, and climbed onto the chair opposite. He did it slowly. He would not scramble in his father's chambers like a child going for a sweet. He sat and folded his hands and discovered that he had inherited his father's hands and felt for a moment sick with it. "It is an opportunity," Tywin said, as if the word were a horse that only he could ride. "For you to make amends." "Amends," Tyrion repeated. "For the boy I did not kill. For the damage you have done this house," Tywin said almost gently. "For the attention you attract. For the tone with which you move through the world, as if its rules do not apply to you. They will apply. They always do. And for the things you did that required obedience," Tyrion said, and was pleased to hear the words leave his mouth without trembling. Tywin's gaze did not change. He had a way of being infuriated that did not move a muscle. "You will not speak of matters you do not understand," he said. "I understand that you housed a butcher under your roof because he was useful," Tyrion said softly. "I understand that a butcher fell today, and a prince from the south will want to know whose knife he held in his hand." "A prince from the south can want many things," Tywin said. "It does not alter what is. Dorne will have its satisfactions." "And will I?" Tyrion asked, and the question was like stepping into a pool he knew to be too cold. "You will accept a task," Tywin said. "You will perform it competently for the first time in your life. You will keep your head low and your mouth shut, and perhaps in time you will remove the blemish your birth has been to your mother's memory." Tyrion laughed then, because if he had not, he might have died of not laughing. "What task?" he asked, when he could breathe, and saw a tiny, precise line appear at the corner of his father's left eye because Tywin had not expected the tone he was going to use for those words. "The city's accounts," Tywin said. "You managed them before. You will manage them again. The Iron Bank writes letters, and I wish not to read them. The Crown's debts are a snarl of promises and pride. Untangle them. Go to the counting houses that bear your name and remind them which name it is. Make the coin flow the way it should. In short, do work." Tyrion tilted his head. "No Casterly Rock then?" he asked pleasantly. Tywin's mouth did not grow thin. In Tywin, the entire mouth was itself thinness. "No," he said. "The rock is not meant for you. It's meant for Jaime," Tyrion said softly. "It is meant for my legacy," Tywin corrected him. "That is larger than any child." He moved a paper aside with 2 fingers. It was not theatrics. It was a contempt for what was not necessary to be said. "You will take this as a command, not a request. You will present yourself to the treasury tomorrow. You will not go to Littlefinger's whores, and you will not speak to the Prince of Dorne, and you will not be seen at the Queen's elbow." "Ah," Tyrion said. "There it is." Tywin sat back. His eyes, which had never been warm, were colder now. "You will behave," he said, "or you will discover that law is a net constructed by men. There are knotted places and weak places, and clever men can sometimes pass through them. But those who own the net own the rope as well." He paused. "Do not force me to draw it tight." "You do not own the gods," Tyrion said softly. "And today they spoke." Tywin considered that and did not laugh. "The gods are a comfort to the poor," he said. "We are not poor. Do not pretend to poverty." Tyrion rose. He felt very small. He felt very old. He had been given the accoutrements of freedom and the gloves of obedience. "You will be asked to show a list," he said, because he wanted to wound, and this was the only knife he had. "You will not show it, but the fact of the list will grow in the room like a bad smell. I wonder how you will take the air then." "I will open a window," Tywin said. "Do not keep me." Tyrion bowed, because to do so without spite was to claim a victory. He left the room and found that his breath was shallow and the corridors very long. He paused when he reached the outer chamber and leaned a moment against the stone until he could be again what he had been earlier, a man who had not died today. The days turned and the palace pretended it had not been stopped from devouring one of its own. Men spoke of the combat as if it were a grain measure that had been quarrelsome and then improved its opinion. Then they stopped speaking of it, as men do when what has happened is not profitable to remember and might be dangerous to repeat. Tyrion rose at a reasonable hour and went to the counting rooms and discovered that the clerks there lived in a world of little scratches that meant comfort or misery to 13,000 people, and that they did not, under any circumstances, wish a dwarf to hand them their quills. He took a day to work out where the coin went. He took 3 to work out where it had gone. On the 4th he wrote a letter that had not been written in years, a letter that carried the name of the rock at the bottom, and when the man whose seal he used discovered he had used it, he said nothing because the letter had been written correctly. He drank every night and he drank less than he wished. He saw his sister once during those first days. She came to the hall where men drink and argued with the chamberlain in a voice so quiet it made the walls lean in to listen. She saw him and stopped, and for a moment he thought she would say his name in the way a woman calls her dog. She did not. She stood 10 feet away and looked at him as if trying to measure whether a bow would fit around his neck. Then she smiled. "Little brother," she said. "Sister," he replied. He lifted his cup and nodded in her direction, precisely in the manner of a stranger at an in acknowledging another's misfortune. "You look well." "You do not," she said. "I am told the gods have spoken. I suppose sometimes even gods stutter." "Careful," he said. "The gods may be our father's friends, and you will offend them." "We have better friends," she said. "Be careful, Tyrion. You walked out of one grave. That does not mean the earth has grown fond of your feet." She turned and went, leaving the air around him colder, his wine warmer, his heart wedged under his ribs in a place it did not fit. He wrote to the Iron Bank and wrote to the Tyrells and wrote to men who had never expected to receive letters from a Lannister who signed with such careful, cramped script. He sent men with quiet boots to speak with those who had loaned the crown coin they could not afford to loan. He received in return men who had pledged daughters or grain or their own necks to the crown's happiness and found that happiness had been delayed. He arranged matters. He shuffled loans like a juggler with too many balls, and the balls would not permit themselves to fall. It was a game and a grindstone, and he hated it and liked it and did it well. He told himself he did it because he was good at it and not because his father had told him to do it. Beyond the counting house work, he went to see the market. He passed through the fishmonger's lane in the early sun and watched women toss heads into a basket with the same movement they used to bring bread to a child's mouth. He bought a string of dried apples and bit into one and felt the sharp sour sweetness break in his teeth and thought, "This is what it is to be alive, to taste something you did not expect and to find you like it." A man with a limp stopped him and asked him for a coin for his daughter. Tyrion asked where the daughter was, and the man pointed to the shadow of a stall, and there was a girl there with one eye that did not look where he wanted it to, and she held a rag doll by one arm and watched him with the other eye. He gave the man the coin and gave the girl the apple from the string and went on and felt emptier and larger for it both. Oberyn did not leave, not yet. He stayed and he drank and he spoke in rooms where words had so long only ever been made of iron. He met with Tywin privately twice. Tyrion knew this because the servants made noises when something had happened and when nothing had happened, and he had learned to differentiate those tones. He wanted badly to know what had been said and badly not to know. On the 3rd day Oberyn sent for him. The message was deliberate without being urgent. Tyrion went because he had not yet learned by pain not to go where he had not been forbidden. The prince's rooms were a warm riot of soft things and hard ideas. Illyria was not there. Oberyn poured wine of a color that was almost brown and meant age and taste, and took up his spear and leaned it against the wall as if to say, "I'm not going to use this, but also I could." "Your father did not give me a name," he said plainly when Tyrion had Saturday. "He gave me instead a lecture on the nature of necessary men." "I have had that lecture," Tyrion said. "You do not forget it." "I shall not," Oberyn said. "What he did give me, however, was something perhaps more valuable than a name. He gave me a promise of Dorne's acknowledgement, of our rights, of something like friendship." "How curious." "Curious," Tyrion agreed. He turned the cup on the table and watched how the light took the wine and made it suggest more of itself. "It will be a promise of convenience. He will keep it until he needs to break it. Then he will break it and ask the gods to praise his strength." "Of course," Oberyn said and smiled. "But the breaking will cost him more now that a certain head is rolled away from his table. You must know," Tyrion said. That you made enemies when you killed him. Enemies are a symptom, Oberyn said. They are a sign of being alive. Besides, I brought my own. They sat in companionable danger for an hour and spoke of matters that had nothing to do with the present, Theros' olives. A song Tyrion had never heard in which a man tells the truth to his wife and she thanks him and they go on being married. A carved ivory comb brought to King's Landing from places beyond any map that showed seas built of wind. For a small window of time Tyrion felt himself a person again and not only a problem to be solved by larger, blunter people. He left the prince then and went to his chambers and found a raven waiting, black and self-satisfied on the sill, and the bird allowed him to take the message from its leg with the indifference of an aristocrat. The seal was wax dark as old cherries. The hand was Baelish's, sneering even through its careful calligraphy. The words were all suggestion and none admission. He read them anyway, and when he'd finished he held the parchment over a candle until the edges crisped and curled. He slept badly that night and better the next. He dreamed of a girl and of a melon and of a spearhead driven through iron as if iron were cake and of an old man's hands, not his father's, washing blood from a stone that had never done them wrong. He woke with his heart doing careful work and the sound of that relentless cistern drip in his head, and he got up and dressed and went about the day and allowed the city to pretend it knew him. In the weeks that followed, small changes occurred and were ignored. Ser Qyburn, with his grave manner and unwholesome interest in what's beneath the skin, walked more often at twilight with bundles that did not smell like laundry. The queen found a confessor whose sermons made old ladies flinch and young ones think they had been forgiven for kissing in the dark. The Tyrells planted more roses and the roses did well. Lord Mace grew fatter on flattery and meats that others could not afford to smell. Jaime practiced with a left-handed knight who did not have his skill but had stubbornness as strong as an ox's neck. And he laughed once in the yard and then did not again for 3 days. Tyrion wrote a second letter to the Iron Bank and a third. In the second he failed on a figure by a margin that would have embarrassed him once, and he corrected it in the third and apologized and felt a small pride in writing apology in that fine hand. He took a walk along the curtain wall at dusk and watched the gulls making their lives out of wind and refuse and asked himself if he had ever done any better. He went to a brothel one night and told himself that using the comfort of a stranger and then paying her and then adding coin to the purse when her smile was tired was an improvement on something. He left before dawn, ashamed and satisfied in equal measure. He did not see his father until summoned again, weeks after the combat, when the wind off the river had turned and the city smelled different. He found Tywin at the window this time, which was like finding a mountain in a well. The older man looked out into the distance as if distance could be taught manners. "We have word of the north," he said without turning. "What word?" Tyrion asked, stepping into a room that had cooled in his absence. "Too much and too little," Tywin said. "The boy will be a king until he learns what a king must be, and then he will be dead. Men in the Riverlands eat horses. The Greyjoys do not know what they want. And at the wall, crows write in their clumsy script and ask for coin and justice, neither of which the world owns enough of." "We could send one," Tyrion said, because it was something to say, and Tywin glanced at him then with the look of a man who had found a flea on a good horse. "We could send both," Tywin said. "We will consider sending neither. You will attend a meeting tomorrow. There will be certain matters of the faith to discuss." "The faith," Tyrion repeated, and tasted the scab of that word. He thought of Cersei's new confessor. He thought of men with shaved scalps and eyes like nails. His father went back to the window. He had the posture of a man who had never considered how much of himself could be reflected in glass. "Be who you can be," he said, and the words were gentle and therefore cruel. "Do not try to be more." "I have never managed that," Tyrion said on impulse. "It is my best quality." Tywin did not smile and he did not look angered, and Tyrion knew he had planted something in him that might sprout in a year or never. On the way out, he passed Jaime in the corridor and they did not stop because to stop would have made people curious. They let their shoulders almost touch and that was enough. He found Oberyn in the yard teaching a boy with an ink-black braid to step lightly in heavy shoes, and he watched for a time and felt the world become something he could live in. That night he dreamed again of the fight, and the dream shifted at the end. In it, Oberyn did not thrust the spear into Gregor's visor. He hesitated to ask for words. He waited for confession as if confession were the end of a sentence and not a beginning. He died then, horribly, and Tyrion woke with his mouth open and the heat on his face and the awareness that there are worlds where men die that are not this one only because someone decided not to speak too soon. He lay still, thanking no one specifically. When dawn came, he rose for the meeting about the faith. They held it in a long chamber with a ceiling painted with saints whose faces had been scrubbed indignantly by time. Mace Tyrell spoke too much. Pycelle sniffed and looked as if a hand had been placed on his head and pushed him into his collar. Cersei's eyes were cold and fell upon the High Septon as on a man who had taken something without asking. Qyburn said nothing because Qyburn liked most of all to be in rooms that did not notice him. They discussed granting more authority to men who asked for it in the gods' names and tied strings to those requests until the room looked like a spider had done a fine and foolish job. The point of it was clear to Tyrion: to build a power that would owe its gratitude to a queen who wished her brother removed from the table in a manner that could be called pious. He watched his father acquiesce, carefully and in a way that would leave his fingers free to snip those strings later. He spoke once, suggesting a levy on the wealth collected by the faith for the purpose of rebuilding the poorer districts. Cersei smiled at him, then a smile like a lamp cut in half, and said coolly, "Alms are the poor's business. They are very proud of their poverty. Then let them be proud of new roofs," Tyrion said, and the High Septon, who had become more nervous the closer Cersei leaned toward him, blinked and murmured that yes, roofs were godly in all seasons. Tywin watched his son and did not show whether he approved. It was as much of a gift as he had ever given him. After the meeting, in the hallway outside, Margaery Tyrell crossed his path in a drift of polite perfume and intelligence. Her handmaidens fluttered like small white flags in a breeze behind her. She paused and looked at him as if she had found something in the grass that might be edible. "My lord," she said, "I am pleased for your good fortune." "I do not believe in fortune," Tyrion replied. "Only in men with spears who know what they are doing. That is a type of fortune," she said, untroubled. "You will find it again, I'm sure." Her eyes were blue and tired and very alive. "You will not stay quiet," she added mildly. "Do I sound that noisy?" he asked. "You sound like a man who cannot help himself," she said. "You sound like a man who will pick up a thing to see how it was made. The court is built of things that were not meant to be picked up." "I will mind my hands," he said, half bowing. "Just not now," she said, and moved on, the flock of handmaidens around her like innocents who had learned to stab only soft parts. He went back to his rooms. He sat and thought about the wall and the rivers and a girl who had gone to ground where ground was the same as sky. He thought of the spearhead in a man's eye and of the way men built laws so they could feel clean when they murdered. He thought of honey and about how something could be so sweet you wished never to taste it again. He poured himself a cup of wine and did not drink it. He sat in the afternoon, the doors open to a little court where a lizard basked, and the sound of the city came to him in a wash. Sellers crying their wares, children making verses of filth, a horse stamping, a woman laughing and then not. At dusk, a boy came with a note. The seal was plain because the sender was plain when he wished to be. Tyrion broke it and read the few words and smiled. Oberyn invited him to a private supper. He went. The prince had arranged a table on a balcony that looked toward the river, set with simple dishes, nothing rich. There was a stew of chickpeas and lamb, flat bread warm from a stove, a salad that contained herbs Tyrion could not name and did not need to, and that made his mouth wake up like a man startled pleasantly from sleep. Illyria came late, her hair undone and falling down her back, her mouth stained by some fruit that had no business in this climate. They ate and did not talk of politics until the second jug of wine, and then Oberyn said, "I think you should consider leaving." "And go where?" Tyrion said. "To Dorne." "If not," Oberyn said, "somewhere else. The world is a map with many unkind edges, but there are gentle parts. Your sister will not rest. Your father," he shrugged, "your father is a machine that will run until it breaks." Your brother is a soldier learning a new weapon, and until he has learned it, he will break himself. There are people who would like you better than those who currently own you." Tyrion leaned back. The night air had cooled and the lamps along the river had come fully into their own. He could see, down below, a pair of lovers walking close, their arms touching, their conversation tender as a new loaf. He wanted to say that he could not go because so much here was unfinished, like pages out of order. He wanted to say that he would go and that he was a fool for not having gone already. He wanted to say nothing at all. He ate bread instead and chewed it carefully and swallowed. "I will think on it," he said, which was the honest lie men tell themselves before they go on doing what they have always done. Oberyn did not press. He smiled that small slice of moon. "We will leave soon," he said. "We have gotten what we came for, or as much of it as one can. There are girls who will miss me and men who will cheer and ladies who will wonder if I would have loved them. It is well to leave while people are still wondering." "You will be missed," Tyrion said. "I will be remembered," Oberyn corrected and drank. And on his mouth there was a small sorrow that had nothing to do with him and therefore everything to do with him. They sat for an hour longer and spoke of what might be done to a city like this by kindness and by cruelty, and found that the answers were much the same in both cases, and Tyrion felt the ache in his chest and told himself it was only the wine. When he returned to his rooms, Bronn was on the balcony like a cat who has forgiven a house for not having rats. "There were men asking for you," he said. "There are always men asking for me," Tyrion said. "These had the wrong badges and the right shoes," Bronn said, and when Tyrion said nothing he added, "The Queen's dogs. Shall I bite them back?" "Not yet," Tyrion said. He sat and felt the dark settle. "My father wants me to behave. My sister wants me to vanish. Prince wants me to flee. A friend wants me to spend my coin. For once in my life, Bronn, I have too many choices." Bronn squinted at the moon. "You always did," he said. "You just didn't know it. What's your choice?" Tyrion looked at his hands, the broad, blunt fingers like tools that had found uses they did not want. He thought of a lizard in the sun, and of children with bad rhymes, and of a spear. He thought of a girl who had gone over the sea and become a word on a bird's leg. He thought of the wall and of men wearing black and writing bad letters and asking politely for coin, and for any men with sense left to come and be fools among them. He thought of honey, and of water dripping in the dark. "I'll let you know," he said. He lay down after Bronn had gone and he slept. And the city around him worked and lied and loved and burned, and the river went on being a river, and the sky had nothing to say about any of it. In the morning, he woke to the smell of bread and to the sound of a bird that had never learned the proper way to sing, and to his own heart reminding him that it was not to be trusted. And he rose, and he began another day of doing the best he could, which had never been good and had sometimes been enough. 2 days later Oberyn came to take his leave. He wore traveling clothes that looked like a drawing of traveling clothes done by a man who had never traveled. Illyria kissed Tyrion on both cheeks and left the smallest impression of her mouth on his skin, and he would discover it later, as when a man discovers a leaf pressed between the pages of a book he had loved. Oberyn took Tyrion's hands, both, and Dee looked at him very hard. "You are not a good man," he said. "I know," Tyrion said. He felt that the kindness was in the statement. "You will not be happy," Oberyn said. "I will try not to be," Tyrion said. "You will be alive," Oberyn said, as if it were both instruction and mercy. "Remember what to do with that." They went away then, like a tide that had come in and licked the shore very clean in a few places, and Tyrion stood on the parapet and watched the Dornish banners disappear around a corner of the city that had eaten so many banners it no longer tasted them. He turned. He went down into the streets. He walked to the counting house. He wiped his mouth of the taste of farewell and put on the taste of numbers, and did what men do who have survived the morning. He lived until the afternoon and then lived until the evening. He understood that he had not won so much as been spared. He understood that being spared is sometimes the more difficult thing. At the small council a week later, Cersei brought a new piece onto the board. A decree about the faith that had been discussed in that long chamber was brought in disguised as a humble request, and Tyrion saw the shape of the trap's mouth. "If the city will allow the faith to arm itself," she said sweetly. The city will then be protected by those with the purest motives. Armed men have only one motive, Tyrion said, almost to himself. Mace declared himself satisfied by the concept of purity and weapons somehow. The High Septon looked like he might be sick if the Queen's hand brushed his sleeve one more time. Tywin sat and said nothing. After a moment he nodded once. The motion was a signature. Tyrion's stomach turned. When the meeting was over, he lingered and his father did not ask why. He said it anyway. The faith will be used, he said softly, not accusing, merely saying the plainer part aloud. Everything is used, Tywin said. That is what things are for. Some things are for themselves, Tyrion said. Wine, sleep, children playing at lions. Tywin's face turned, for a breath, into something he had not designed. There are no such children, he said. He stood. He left. The room was suddenly too large and too small. Tyrion sat with his hands on the arm of his chair and felt the path ahead of him fork and fork and fork. That night, he went to the walls and looked north. He could not see the wall from King's Landing, and perhaps men build fortresses because they need something to look at when imagination fails. He watched the river instead. He thought of leaving and of staying. He thought of choosing and of being chosen by the moving parts of the world. He felt the wind lift his hair and wished his hair were something it was not, and realized he had been making that wish since he had been 12, and that it had never been granted, and that perhaps the gods had saved their favors for larger things. He laughed softly, and the laugh surprised him into kindness for a moment. Kindness even for himself. He went back to his rooms. On his table was a small pouch. Inside was a cheap, tin brooch in the shape of a beetle, flat and ugly and silly. He turned it over in his fingers for a long time, longer than was sensible, until he realized that it was exactly the right weight for what it was, and that made it beautiful. He pinned it to the inside of his doublet where no one would see it. He slept and did not dream of blood for once, and when he woke, the drop from the cistern in his head had slowed, or he had forgotten to count it, and the day ahead seemed to be made of possibilities that were like narrow doors in a very long corridor. Tyrion rose and had bread and salt and honey and a peach, and took none of the sweetness for granted. He walked to the counting house, where men greeted him without warmth and without contempt now, and he thought to himself, if there is anything I am good at, it is opening the narrow doors one after another until someone behind me has to run to catch up. He smiled and let himself become, for a time, not the story of the day, not the cause of a trial and a spectacle, but an irritating, competent man among ledgers. And yet the memory of the spear was never far. It lived in a back room of his head, attendant and ready. It waited not as a warning alone, but as instruction. When the time came to set weight behind one true thing, to lean, to press, to refuse to listen for words that were only there to keep a killer rather than a corpse, he would try to remember to do that. Cersei would not forget. The faith would find its swords. The city's debts would continue to be a hydra. The North would write letters it should not need to write. Men would die who did not deserve to. Men would live who deserved to be forgotten. And Tyrion would walk over the sand of this yard and this yard and this yard, making small lines with his small boots, and count the steps and lose count and begin again, and all the while he would consider what he might yet steal from a man who kept his sins on a shelf, and from a world that had given him back his life and had asked for something, not yet named, in exchange. Evening came with copper in it. He stood on the balcony, and the breeze brought the smells of fish and lantern oil and baking bread and a suggestion of something sweet in a house not his. He leaned on the stone and thought that perhaps being spared is an art like any other. He thought of practicing it until he improved. He thought, I am still here. He thought it twice, then 3 times, and the words changed from complaint to prayer, and from prayer to a promise made to no one. Below, a woman began to sing a song he had never heard. It had a simple tune. It was about a man who could not choose a road, and so he sat and waited for the road to come to him. And when it did, it carried him to a place he had been going all along. He listened until the woman's voice tired and the city made its noises louder, and then he went inside and closed the shutters and lit a candle and wrote numbers until the candle was too small to be useful, and the numbers ran together like grains of sand pressed by a very large man's weight. He was alive. He counted that too. He put that into the ledger at the bottom of the page where it belonged, not as a boast but as a simple entry in a long list of debts and balances. He closed the book and the candle died. The night held him and forgave nothing, and he lay down and the slow drip in his mind returned, patient and precise, and he slept as men do who are both watched and watching, and dreamed not of blood but of water finding its level.